Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Jeff Nielson. He is a writer, editor, and managing partner of Bullion Bull Canada. He publishes approximately about 1,000 commentaries on mainstream news and precious metals websites around the world. And I am very happy to have him back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Jeff, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Always a pleasure, Dave.
Hey, it's a pleasure having you, and I really appreciate you taking time out and coming on the Spotlight. And as everyone knows, we just had an election. Trump is now the president of the United States, and I just wanted to get your take on where you think things are headed with the economy since now Trump is in the driver's seat. Do you think everything is just going to improve with all his policies and everything that he's going to try to do, or do you think we're still in terrible shape and the country, the world is not looking good at all?
Well, you probably won't come across a more cynical individual than myself. And I don't know if I've mentioned it before in previous interviews, but my description of the U.S. government and its political system is a two-party dictatorship. So, for me, the public squabbling between the two parties is just theater. We know they collude frequently. It's the only time things ever actually get done. And of course, when things actually do get done in Washington, it's always for the benefit of the upper class and big business. So, my attitude all along has been basically, it doesn't matter who wins. In most respects, there's always a possibility that, of course, Trump being Trump will do something to surprise people. But I viewed both candidates as puppets going into the election, and I haven't changed my opinion. I mean, Trump had a Goldman Sachs stooge handling his finances and a Washington insider running his campaign. So for me, that's about as establishment as you get. He's already pledged his allegiance to the big banks, so I don't exactly see how anything is going to change as far as the status quo. And of course, we also know that Hillary, the pretender to the throne, was both a lover of big banks and loved by them. I mean, Lloyd Blankfein was singing her praises. So I see no difference at all in other than surface appearance in terms of how things are going to operate with respect to the U.S. government.
Do you think he'll be able to turn the economy around? I mean, there's not many people, especially out in the corporate media, and actually people that I've been speaking to, I see it all over Facebook and different places where, I think it was the U.S. Treasury Secretary who came out and said that Obama completely fixed the economy. It is completely recovered. He did an incredible job. And now we have Trump coming in. So to the general public, it seems that, the economy is doing fine. And there's others that are looking at the economy, like myself, you, and others who say, the economy's not doing as well as they're all saying. So what's your take on the economy right now? Has it improved? Is it getting worse? And if it is getting worse, will Trump be able to help it? Will he be able to fix the problems that we have?
Well, there's a lot to cover there, and I think I've got to start right at the beginning with how these liars in government in your country and in mine lie with numbers. And it all starts with lying about inflation. When you exaggerate the inflation rate, and in this case, of course, they're pretending it's near zero when people who live in the real world and have to eat food and find a place to live know that it's far higher than that. But we're told inflation is near zero while food prices are soaring and housing prices are soaring. And of course, so that's the big fiction that these liars start with, is to fabricate this ridiculous rate of inflation that's far below the real rate. And what people have to understand here is that when our economic growth is measured, when we measure our quote-unquote GDP, the gross domestic product is, in fact, a net calculation. And what has to be netted out to make the calculation valid is the rate of inflation. Because if you don't eliminate inflation out of the calculation, then when you pretend to be calculating gross domestic product, you're in fact actually including a distortion, the increase in prices of goods and services, and that distorts the calculation. So to get a proper calculation of GDP, you have to properly subtract the rate of inflation. So here's the catch. If you're ridiculously lying about inflation, pretending it's far below its real rate, then when you go to calculate the gross domestic product, you will be grossly underestimating inflation again, and thus you're not taking out inflation from the calculation. You're basically, when our governments claim that inflation is near zero, it means they're not taking out any inflation out of the calculation of gross domestic product. So in the real world, inflation is running at least 5%, and of course, for most people who have lower levels of consumption, it's much higher than that, over 10%. You subtract that from the GDP measurement, and you're into negative numbers. So, in fact, if the calculation had ever been done properly, in other words, honestly, over these past years, there would never have been a U.S. recovery. It would have just been more and more shrinkage. Similarly, with the so-called new jobs that have been created, all you have to do is look at a chart that's produced by the St. Louis Fed. It's called the civilian participation rate. And it's a measurement of the actual number of people in the U.S. population that are working. And the point here is that since the supposed recovery began, there's roughly 3 million less people working in the U.S. population than back in beginning of 2009. So obviously, if there's 3 million less Americans with jobs than there was 8 years ago, then there can't possibly have been 11 million or 14 million or whatever the fantasy number is of new jobs under the Obama regime. They're all fantasy jobs. They're all statistical fabrications. And so, like I say, this isn't an opinion. You just have to look at that chart and see the drop in the number of Americans that are actually working in the population. And there haven't been any new jobs. So there's been no GDP growth. There's been no new jobs. In fact, there's less jobs than there was when Obama got elected. The supposed recovery is nothing but statistical lies.
How are they coming up with the remarks that the Treasury Secretary said that the economy is doing well? I mean, is everything a complete lie then?
Well, and of course, this is the thing. So what do they talk about when they boast about the strength of the economy? They say, look at the GDP numbers and look at the job numbers. Well, of course, those are both, as we just discussed, totally fictional. Now, the way the jobs numbers are fabricated, it's actually varied. At the beginning of this sort of regime of lies, the number one tool they used to create these fantasy jobs was a statistical tool called the birth-death model. And it's this incredibly dubious economic theory that was tacked on to the jobs calculation that basically imputed a large number of additional jobs being created in the economy that were somehow missed by any conventional measurement. So this birth-death calculation was adding on these fantastic numbers of jobs every month, to the point that like more than 1 million new jobs a year of supposed jobs growth were totally due to this one model. And then, of course, at the end of the year, they do their hindsight calculation where they have actual data to put into it, and so they can measure out whether any of this calculation was valid. And so you had this ridiculous game going on where over the course of the year, they'd add in more than 1 million of these fantasy jobs from this birth-death model. And then at the end of the year, when they did their recalculation, they would subtract out all of those jobs and sometimes even more. But of course, the calculation at the end of the year doesn't get any press at all. Nobody ever sees that. So all they get are the headlines during the course of the year when these fantasy jobs are being added. Oh yeah, more jobs, more jobs, more jobs. Well, of course, people finally caught on to that game. So then they developed a new system for creating all these fantasy jobs, and it was to create these ridiculous quote-unquote seasonal adjustments. So now, every month, the seasonal adjustment adds fantastic numbers of new jobs into the jobs report calculation. So literally, the biggest job creator in the U.S. economy over the past 6 or 8 years has been the calendar.
When we hear all this and everything that you're telling us that we have less jobs now.
I'm not telling you. I'm saying that's what the chart shows. The chart with the actual number of Americans working. There's less Americans working now than there was before. So it's not an opinion. That's what the chart shows.
So we have less people working now, but they're telling us that we're in a recovery. Unemployment's out at 4.9%. Of course, those are the numbers they're throwing at us. Actually, they made the GDP rise right before the election up to 2.9%. I think we exported a lot of soybeans or something like that, a one-off thing. Where they, of course, pushed this all up for the election. But when we hear all this, and when everyone else hears all this, they think that we're in this incredible recovery. They believe that we're in this incredible recovery. And while everyone is believing this, we have the Fed, on the other hand, telling us that they want more inflation, that if the economy runs into a crisis, they will do more QE, maybe 2 trillion, 4 trillion, whatever it's going to be. And it seems like they're planning on the economy coming down. They're not saying like, oh, we're in this recovery, let's start raising interest rates. Yes, they use the idea they're going to raise interest rates, but they never really do it. I mean, what would happen if they did raise interest rates? And I'm not talking about 25 basis, but I'm talking about if they brought it back up to,
normalized. Say 4%.
Yes. Well, and this is the whole point. This is where we see more lies and more insanity with the Fed. Because, of course, as you point out, normal interest rates are much higher, up around 4%, at least 3%, would be described as being, normalized interest rates. Well, of course, and the point is that interest rates need to be that high with any healthy economy in order to avoid the economy being overheated. In other words, if you've got a healthy economy going, you need that amount of drag on interest rates to avoid the economy from, bubbling over with excessive growth and asset bubbles, and because that, leads to, of course, a crash. So here we've had supposedly this never-ending recovery in the U.S., where at the same time the Federal Reserve has been afraid to raise interest rates, fractionally. And so, I mean, it's just laughable because, of course, we've never, ever had interest rates like this before in our history. And the reason we haven't is because it's so recklessly inflationary and recklessly stimulative that our governments have never before been so reckless as to attempt something like this, even for a short period of time. And now we have this permanently institutionalized regime of these ultra-low, ultra-reckless interest rates. And of course, it's because all of these Western economies are crippled to the point of death, in large part because of the debt loads they're carrying, but also because of the massive unemployment that these corrupt governments have manufactured with their corrupt policies to serve the rich.
So what happens now? They don't have Hillary. That's who they really wanted in office. They have Trump.
Well, that's what you say. I disagree.
Okay.
I've written for the past 2+ years that the establishment was going to put in a Republican because that's the game they play. Tweedledee, Tweedledum. Tweedledee gets 8 years and Tweedledum gets 8 years. And it's the only way they can maintain the illusion of democracy. And of course, and they were scheduling this with their crashes for the last 2 cycles as well. So you'd have the one party in power for 8 years, and right near the end of their term, you'd crash the economy. And so you blame that party going out. So they'd be out of power for 8 years. And then, of course, the other party was supposedly the white knights riding in. And the 8 years that the other party was banished to the wilderness would give voters a chance to forget about how much they despised them. And while they got to learn to re-despise the party they voted in power again. So, we have this ridiculous game of the establishment rotating their pawns from the one party to the next. So I was predicting a Republican victory all along as what the establishment wanted. And like I say, with Trump having establishment people in charge of his campaign, he would not. I don't see there's any way he would have gotten elected if he wasn't, in fact, serving the establishment. And like I say, we've already seen how cozy he is with the big banks. So, if you're cozy with the big banks, you're not anti-establishment.
What do you think he's going to do? Because what we're seeing right now is he's saying he's going to improve the economy. He's going to, bring back jobs. I mean, every president says the same thing. But I guess we have to see his actions of what he actually does. I wasn't rooting for Trump. I wasn't rooting for Hillary Clinton. I just wanted someone who would work for the people. And the only thing I see constant right now is the economy is completely failing. And we're heading into a new year, and I don't see it getting any better. I don't see any improvement. I think all the things they've done before the election, it's all going to start to fall apart. And to me, I know you said that, the outgoing administration, they like to blame the economy crash, and they did this during Obama and McCain when they were running in the race of 2008. But here we are. He's already elected the president. If the economy fails now, who do they blame, and why are they waiting?
Well, you see, and this is why I had been predicting that we would have seen a crash sometime late spring, early summer at the latest. And the fact that we haven't doesn't have me relieved in any respect. In fact, it has me much more alarmed, because now, in fact, if they trigger a crash through supposedly economic causes, it would be, like you say, squarely blamed on the current regime, and it would sabotage the popularity of this government early in its mandate, and of course ruin the whole Tweedledee Tweedledum rotation. So the other possibility here is that we're going to see a crash triggered from an exogenous cause. In other words, something outside of the economy is going to cause the economy to crash. And here, of course, those with, I suppose you want to say, more conspiracy-oriented thinking are going to look to things like a manufactured war or another manufactured terrorist, quote-unquote, terrorist event. And then, of course, use that as an excuse for an economic crash, and then the Trump government doesn't get blamed for the event, but the bankers still get their reset so they can crash markets and then start their next bubble and crash cycle all over again.
So you still think that they're going to try to push war? I mean, because right now he's trying to warm up to Putin right now and reestablish relations with Putin. This is what's coming out of the news. And it looks like the U.S. has really lost their moderate rebels, their terrorist groups in Syria, and they've kind of lost Syria. I mean, with that, all that going on right there, it really means the petrodollar is kind of doomed, because they've lost Yemen, they've lost Libya, they lost Lebanon, and now they wanted to get into Syria, then Iran. So do you still see that they're going to try to push war?
Well,
with Russia or something?
Well, yeah, and the thing is, with Russia in particular, think about how easy it is for this government to manufacture a war. Because what have we been hearing over the last few months with respect to Russia? What's their latest supposed sins they're committing? Oh, Russia's now into cyber terrorism. They're hacking into this, they're hacking into that, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the world's foremost cyber terrorists are, of course, the U.S. government. I mean, they have a global lead by a country mile in this respect. So, I mean, it's so laughable to hear this constant fear-mongering about supposed threats of outside cyber terrorism, when why would any government engage in aggressive cyber terrorist activities against a regime that has the most offensive cyber terrorist capabilities in the world? I mean, you don't poke a bully with a stick. I mean, that's just silliness. So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But think about how the beauty of claiming all of these cyber terrorism attacks. There's absolutely no way in the world that Russia can prove it didn't do it. I mean, because in fact, there's no way in the world the U.S. can prove that a cyber terrorist attack ever occurred. They're just going to say it happened. Say it happened. There's no proof that it ever happened. They just say it happened. And so they say, let's say that, oh yeah, Russia hacked into the Pentagon and did all this damage to the computer systems, blah, blah, blah. We consider this an act of war. And it's that easy. So, I mean, all throughout modern history, it's been very easy to fabricate wars. So, and of course, in the case of Iraq, if you can't even fabricate anything properly in advance, you just make up stuff after the fact. So there's no doubt that if the U.S. government wants a war bad enough, it'll have one, and it'll create a pretext to make it appear to be the victim again, as the master of the false flag attack that it is.
You're saying that you still think there's going to be some type of an event where they'll blame this entire collapse on, instead of blaming Trump.
Well, that seems to be the least damaging scenario to the control structure. You create an exogenous cause for an economic crash so that the current regime remains blameless when you want them to hold the reins of power for a full 8-year period. And that allows them to maintain control with a minimum amount of unrest. In fact, of course, if you stage, some phony terrorist attack or a stage of war, you get the old rally around the flag syndrome, and people get all warm and fuzzy about the current government, no matter, how much they previously hated the administration.
Is there a time? Do you think there is a time frame that they're going to do this, or are they going to do it before he gets into the White House, like in January, or do you think they're going to wait a couple months and then boom, they're going to do something?
Well, I suspect that there's a large element of fear with the oligarchs right now, and the fear element being that our government's already been taken well past the point of insolvency. I mean, this is another reason for these permanent near zero interest rates. It is the only way that all of these bankrupt Western regimes can avoid having to immediately declare bankruptcy and have a Western, and of course then it'll be global debt jubilee. Because our economies are now so hopelessly insolvent. We've had so much employment destruction that's destroyed the tax base, and we've had so much mounting debt that these regimes are now so hopelessly bankrupt that the only way they're able to feign solvency is by artificially keeping these interest rates down at near zero levels. So, this is the whole point there. We need a reset. We need a debt jubilee event, and the control structure is desperately trying to prevent this. But if they go and trigger a crash, that, of course, drastically worsens the fiscal situation for all these regimes. And so I genuinely believe, are afraid that when they take the markets down for their reset so they can create their next bubble cycle, that it'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and there'll be no way to hold things together.
You mentioned a debt jubilee. Do you think they're going to go down that path where they say, okay, let's just wipe out all the debt?
Well, once again, we're not dealing with a matter of opinion. We're dealing with a matter of history and a matter of arithmetic. Debt jubilee will occur because debt jubilee has always occurred, because when you have a system of ever-increasing debt with compound interest, the only possible outcome is mass insolvency. That's just the compound interest and simple arithmetic. There's no opinion there at all. And this is where we're heading. And even with these near zero interest rates, where none of these regimes are balancing their budgets, they're all still going deeper into debt at a rapid rate. So there's no possibility of any other outcome here. It's arithmetic, compound interest, debt jubilee, history. It's that simple.
So when we spoke back a couple months ago, we were talking about the collapse and what's going to happen. Do you think at this point it's going to be even worse than it was the last time we spoke? Has things gotten a lot worse where, this is just going to be a complete disaster?
If you look at a corporation, and the corporation gets into insolvency to the point where it's forced to declare bankruptcy, every day the corporation delays that declaration as its fiscal status deteriorates, the bankruptcy proceeding gets worse. So our governments, and of course their overlords, have been delaying our declaration of bankruptcy now for, well, maybe these regimes could have argued they were solvent before the crash of '08. But after that crash, after the damage to their revenues, and after the ridiculous blackmail payments they made to the banking crime syndicate, which they called bailouts, there was no doubt that all of these regimes were ridiculously insolvent from that point onward. So every day that they have delayed their declaration of bankruptcy since the crash of '08 has made the situation worse and worse. So yes, we are 8 years worse from that event now, and of course things are deteriorating at an accelerating rate.
And you mentioned something very interesting, that you're talking about bankruptcies and Trump, and you're also talking about, you believe that they put Trump into the White House, but he is the master of bankruptcies. I mean, he has a lot of businesses that went bankrupt. He understands bankruptcies. And it's just very interesting that he is in the White House now with a situation where the country is about to go bankrupt. I mean, do you think that was planned?
Well, I may have to steal that idea for a commentary topic, because I don't know how, but I had not given consideration to the fact that, as you point out, Trump is the master of bankruptcy, inheriting a bankrupt government. But the symmetry there is pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to think about that some more, because, and I mean, it's one of those situations where, of course, the banking crime syndicate that controls things, they can see the picture. They know that what they have is unsustainable. They know there has to be a complete reset of some form. So, but they control the timing. So the point is, do they think themselves that it's in their best interest to do this tomorrow? Do they think that they should do it next year or 2 years from now? Or do they think it's in their best interest to try to prolong this absolutely maximum amount of time, no matter what the cost to us? And if it's the latter, then maybe they manufacture events and tighten their grip on control enough that they can ride this out for several more years. I mean, look at how fascist our societies have become over the past 8 years with the phony war on terror. All of the changes in security and surveillance and laws, and of course stripping us of our rights, and detention facilities and no trials, and on and on and on. So I mean, we've seen the crime syndicate instruct their lackey governments to go basically full Nazi with their the devolution of our societies. So, we certainly see them preparing for the worst, preparing to maintain control through total coercion. And so, I mean, if you want to look at the worst case scenario, just look at what's being done to our societies in that respect.
And you said something very interesting, that they can keep this going, but eventually what will happen is that the number of people that are actually working is going to decline rapidly. Stores are going to they're going to close down. Holiday seasons are going to continually get worse and worse. Manufacturing is going to get continually worse and worse. Corporate defaults are going to get worse and worse. There's going to have to be a point where, people are going to start to realize, okay, yeah, the stock market's up, they're suppressing gold, but, this whole strip mall's empty, this mall's empty. People that I'm living around, six of them I know don't have a job right now. There's going to be a point where they're going to have to say, okay, I mean, people are figuring it out now. We better do something. So I personally, I don't know how much longer they can keep this up.
Look what look what happened in Greece. Greece is already where we are headed. But once again, the elites, the crime syndicate, whatever you want to call them, has managed to regain control of that government. They somehow managed to coerce Alexis Tsipras to knuckling under, and once again he serves the establishment. So the two previous leading parties in Greece are already known to be corrupt. They've now corrupted Syriza in Greece and regained control of power there. And look what they've already done in Greece, and they've still managed to retain control. So it would be foolish to underestimate both the ruthlessness and the near omnipotence of this syndicate, because any people that attempt to regain true sovereignty are going to have a lot greater struggle than what supposedly happened in the last U.S. election. And let's point things out here. Donald Trump got 1 million less votes this election than Mitt Romney got last election when he lost badly to Obama. So the idea that there's been any sort of quote-unquote independence movement in the United States is nothing but more ludicrous mythology from the media, because in fact, Republican support declined. It's only that Democrat support declined even more. Otherwise, we would not be talking about President Trump today.
Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. Thank you very much. Once again, how can people see your work?
Well, my home base is still bullionbullscanada.com, and I also do some contributing writing for Sprott Money. They're a financial company up in Canada who do their best to get the truth out and are very pro-precious metals. And I also have a new gig these days working for Stockhouse Publishing, promoting small businesses.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being on the X22 Report Spotlight.
My pleasure.